My father did not die in 2012. I went to a funeral. I picked out the casket. I cried for an hour over an urn that I thought contained the man who had raised me. I told my two children, when they were old enough to ask, that their grandfather had died of a heart attack the week before I got married. None of it was true. My father paid a lawyer $12,000 to fake his own funeral. He paid a man at the funeral home another $4,000 to keep his mouth shut. He drove a U-Haul to Phoenix the week of my wedding. He started a new life. He grew a beard. He changed his name on every account he could legally change without raising flags. And for 12 years, he watched me grieve him from a distance, on social media, on a phone he kept hidden from his second wife. My name is Claire. I am 38 years old. 2 months ago, I walked into a coffee shop in Phoenix, Arizona, and I sat down across from a man who had not seen me in 12 years. He went white when he saw me. He tried to stand up. I told him, very calmly, to sit down. And in the next 40 minutes, my father confessed to everything. I recorded the entire conversation. By sundown that day, his second life was over. Let me tell you exactly how I found him. To understand what my father did, you have to understand who I thought he was. His name was Edward Sloan. Everyone called him Ed. He was a high school football coach in a small town in Indiana for 26 years. He coached my brother Tom's team. He coached my husband Marcus's team, 4 years before I started dating Marcus, which was a coincidence that my father had loved telling people about. He had season tickets to the Colts. He had a wood-paneled basement with a bar he had built with his own hands. He drank Miller Lite. He told the same 3 jokes at every Christmas dinner. He had a laugh that you could hear from across a parking lot. My mother had divorced him when I was 16. She had not given me a clear reason at the time. She had told me my father was a difficult man and that they had grown apart. She had told me, when I had pressed her, that I would understand when I was older. I had not understood when I was older. After the divorce, my father had stayed in our hometown. My mother had moved to Cincinnati. My brother and I had stayed with our father because that was what our father had wanted and because my mother had, in retrospect, very strangely, not fought him on it. My father had been a good father, mostly. He had taken me to my volleyball games. He had taught me how to drive. He had paid for half of my college. He had walked me through the apartment I had rented after graduation and told me which deadbolts to install on the door. He had also, I now know, lied to me consistently for at least 7 years before the wedding. I just did not know what about. I got engaged to Marcus in the spring of 2012. I was 26, he was 28. He had proposed to me on a hiking trail outside of Bloomington with a ring his grandmother had left him. He had cried while he proposed. I had cried while I said yes. We had sat on a rock for an hour, looking at the ring on my hand, talking about whether we wanted 3 children or 2. I called my father from the trailhead. He was the first person I called, even before my mother. He had been quiet on the phone. He had said, "Claire, sweetheart, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you." But there was something in his voice, a flatness, the kind of flatness you do not notice in your own father until you replay the call in your head 4 years later, after you have started suspecting he is not actually buried in the family plot. We set the wedding for September of 2012. My father, in the months leading up to the wedding, became increasingly hard to reach. He canceled 2 of our pre-wedding dinners. He missed my brother Tom's graduation from his master's program in May. He told us he had some health issues he was working through, but that he did not want to make a fuss. Tom and I asked him repeatedly what was wrong. He told us repeatedly that it was nothing serious. Then, on the Wednesday before my Saturday wedding, my Aunt Diane, my father's sister, who had been very close to him until the divorce, called me at 6:30 in the morning. She told me my father had had a massive heart attack at his house overnight. She told me she had found him on the floor of his kitchen when she had stopped by to drop off a wedding gift. She told me he was gone. I do not remember the next 4 hours. I remember the next 24. We postponed the wedding. We drove to my father's house. The casket was already at the funeral home because Aunt Diane had already handled the arrangements, which had struck me as fast at the time, but which had been explained to me by my Uncle Pete, my father's brother, who was a nurse, as what people in our family do. The casket was closed. I never saw my father's body. Aunt Diane told me gently that she didn't think I should see him, that the heart attack had been sudden and severe, and that he did not look like himself. My brother, Tom, who was 22 at the time, also did not see the body. He had been told the same thing. My mother, who had been Aunt Diane's sister-in-law for 19 years, attended the funeral. She had cried. She had hugged me. She had told me that despite everything, my father had been a good man in his way. We held the funeral on the Saturday that was supposed to have been my wedding day. Marcus and I rescheduled the wedding for January of the following year. The honeymoon, I now understand, was the only part of the trip my father had budgeted for. The first time I felt something was wrong, my daughter was 3. It was 2017, 5 years after the funeral. I had been organizing photo albums for the kids. I had pulled out a box of my father's old papers from the storage unit Aunt Diane had been keeping, and I had been going through them on my living room floor. I found a letter from Aunt Diane to my father, dated 4 months before his death. It said, in part, "Ed, I will help you if you really need me to, but you have to think about what this is going to do to those kids. There is no coming back from this, not if you do it the way you're saying." I read that letter 3 times. I called Aunt Diane that afternoon. I asked her what she had been talking about. I asked her what "did not come back from" meant. Aunt Diane was silent for a long time. Then she told me, in a voice I had never heard her use before, that the letter had been about a bad business decision my father had been considering. She told me she had talked him out of it. She told me to throw the letter away. She told me some things from the past should stay in the past. I did not throw the letter away. I put it in the same drawer where I had been keeping my father's funeral program, the drawer of the small writing desk in the guest bedroom. I did not open that drawer for 2 years. Then, in 2019, my Uncle Pete, the nurse, my father's brother, who had explained to me the closed casket decision, came to my house for Thanksgiving. Uncle Pete had been drinking, not heavily, 2 glasses of wine. He was 67 and had recently retired. During dessert, my husband Marcus had made a joke about what a coach Ed would have made of these kids, referring to our then 2 children. Uncle Pete had laughed. Then he had said, very quietly into his coffee, "Well, he still might." Marcus had not heard him. The kids had not heard him. I had heard him. I had looked at Uncle Pete across the table. I had said, "What did you just say?" Uncle Pete had gone pale. He had said, Nothing, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have, it's just hard sometimes, you know? I miss him too," talking about him in the past tense. He left within an hour. I had not pressed him, but I had begun that night to keep a list. The list, by 2024, had 31 items on it. It was titled in my own handwriting on the inside cover of a small black notebook I kept in the drawer of the guest bedroom desk, titled "Things That Do Not Make Sense About My Father's Death." Item 1, closed casket. Aunt Diane handled all arrangements before family arrived. Item 2, Aunt Diane found body, alone, no other witnesses. Item 3, father had been distant, canceling visits for 6 months prior to the death. Item 4, letter from Diane, 4 months before death, referencing something you cannot come back from. Item 5, Uncle Pete's comment at Thanksgiving 2019. Item 6, estate was settled in 9 days. Father's house, which we had assumed was paid off, had a fresh second mortgage that drained the equity, money traceable to a single transfer in August 2012, 3 weeks before the death. Items 7 through 15, various inconsistencies in the obituary, the funeral home records, the death certificate. Aunt Diane handled all of it. Items 16 through 22, my mother's strange, slightly relieved demeanor at the funeral, the way she had told me, walking back to the car, "I'm so sorry, sweetheart, but I want you to know, in some ways, your father was already gone for me a long time ago." At the time, I had taken it as poignant. Reading it now, in my black notebook in 2024, it felt different. Item 23 was added on a Wednesday afternoon in May of this year. I had been scrolling Facebook on my lunch break, the kind of mindless scroll where you don't register what you're actually looking at. A friend of mine from college, a woman named Rachel, who had moved to Phoenix in 2018, had posted a photo from a hiking trip she had taken with her boyfriend's family the weekend before. 6 people in the photo: Rachel, her boyfriend's mother, her boyfriend's father, and on the far left of the frame, her boyfriend's stepfather, a tall, gray-bearded man with sunglasses on, smiling, his arm around a woman I did not recognize. I closed Facebook. I closed my eyes. I sat at my kitchen table for 10 minutes. Then I opened my laptop and I started over. That is the end of Block 1. Block 2 begins 3 weeks after I saw that photo, in a coffee shop in Phoenix. The 3 weeks between seeing the photo and walking into the coffee shop were the most disciplined of my life. I want to tell you what I did, because the people who hurt us count on us being too emotional to think clearly. They count on us screaming. They count on us calling them, crying, demanding answers. They count on us being so flooded with feeling that we make the wrong move, the loud move, the move that lets them lawyer up before we can lock anything in. I did not call my father. I did not call Aunt Diane. I did not call my mother. I did not call my brother. I did not tell Marcus, my husband, until the morning of the day I flew to Phoenix. Instead, I did the following. I called my friend Rachel and casually asked her about her boyfriend's stepfather. I told her I thought I had recognized him from a photo, maybe an old family friend. Rachel told me his name was Daniel Mercer. He had moved to Phoenix in late 2012. He had married Rachel's boyfriend's mother in 2014. He worked, in semi-retirement, as a sales rep for a sporting goods company. He had a beard. He had a daughter and a son from a previous marriage back east who he had lost contact with after a bitter divorce. I asked Rachel, very casually, if she had any other photos of him. She sent me 12. In one of them, he was wearing a watch I had given my father for Christmas in 2010, a Timex. I had bought it on sale at a department store with money I had saved from my first real job out of college. I had had his initials engraved on the back. The photo Rachel sent me was zoomed in enough that I could see the engraving. EMS. Edward Michael Sloan. It was him. I hired a private investigator the next morning, a woman named Nora, recommended by a friend of mine who was a divorce attorney. Nora was 61, ex-FBI, and she charged $800 a day. I gave her everything. The photos, the black notebook, the letter from Aunt Diane, the funeral program, the death certificate I had requested from the state of Indiana, which Nora confirmed for me that afternoon was a forgery. Nora found him in 11 days. She found his Phoenix address, his bank accounts, his employer, his current driver's license under the name Daniel Mercer, and, most importantly, the original 2012 paper trail, the U-Haul rental, the lawyer in Indianapolis who had filed the falsified death certificate, the funeral home director, now retired, who had been paid $4,000 in a single Western Union transfer. The fact that my father had not even bothered to use a creative new identity. He had used the maiden name of his own grandmother, plus his middle name, which any halfway competent investigator could trace in an afternoon. Nora told me on the phone when she gave me her final report, he wasn't hiding from a real threat. He was hiding from the embarrassment of his own choices. People who run for embarrassment, Claire, they don't run very far. They expect not to be looked for. She also told me she had, at my request, mapped out my father's daily routine. On Tuesday and Friday mornings, between 8:15 and 9, he had coffee at a local independent coffee shop in North Phoenix called Mesa Grounds. Always alone, always in the same booth, always the same drink. I flew to Phoenix on a Thursday. I checked into a hotel near the coffee shop. I told Marcus, the morning of my flight, what I was about to do. He was the only person who knew. Marcus had cried for 20 minutes. He had asked me if I wanted him to come with me. I had told him no. I had told him this had to be a conversation I had alone. On Friday morning at 8:12 a.m., I walked into Mesa grounds. My father was already in his booth. He had grown a full silver beard. He had lost about 20 pounds. He was wearing reading glasses I had never seen before. He was reading the Arizona Republic with a black coffee in front of him. I ordered a cup of tea at the counter. I paid in cash. I walked over to his booth. I slid into the seat across from him. He looked up. I have never in my entire life seen the color drain out of a human face the way it drained out of his. He started to stand up. I said very quietly, "Dad, sit down. We're going to have a conversation, and you're going to give me the truth, because if you don't, I'm walking from this coffee shop directly to your wife's house. I have her address, and I am introducing myself." He sat down. I placed my phone face up on the table between us. I tapped the red record button on the voice memo app. I made sure he saw me do it. I said, "I need you to start at the beginning." He started crying. I waited. Over the next 40 minutes, my father told me everything. He had been in catastrophic financial trouble in early 2012, a series of bad investments, a real estate deal in Florida that had collapsed in the recession. He had taken out a second mortgage on his house, the house we had grown up in, and lost that money too. He had owed approximately $320,000 to various people, including, at the lower end, 2 men in Indianapolis who he was scared of. He had been receiving threatening voicemails for 6 months. In June 2012, 3 months before the wedding, he had decided to fake his own death. He had told Aunt Diane and Uncle Pete. They had begged him not to. Aunt Diane had eventually agreed to help because, in her words, she was afraid he was actually going to kill himself if she didn't. Uncle Pete, the nurse, had agreed to confirm the body identification at the funeral home. The funeral home director, now retired, who had been paid $4,000 in a single Western Union transfer. My mother had not known. My brother had not known. I had not known. My father had cleared the house, taken what cash he could, driven the U-Haul to Phoenix, and disappeared. He had never paid back any of the people he owed. They had gotten tired of looking after the second year. He had become, on paper, a dead man with a dead estate. The debts had been written off. He had built a new life with a woman named Margaret. He had told her he was a widower. He had told her his children had cut him off after the funeral of his wife. He had not told her about us. He had been Daniel Mercer for 12 years. He told me, crying in the booth, that he had thought about us every single day. I asked him if he had ever thought about coming back. He said, no. I asked him why. He said, "Claire, I knew you were better off without me." I let that sit for a long time. Then I said, "Dad, that was not your decision to make." I left the coffee shop at 9:15 a.m. I had everything I needed. The recording was 43 minutes long. It contained a complete, voluntary, unforced confession of insurance fraud, identity fraud, mortgage fraud, the falsification of a death certificate, and the willful abandonment of a family. Every name was spoken aloud, every dollar amount, every accomplice. I drove from the coffee shop to my hotel. I called my husband. I told him it was done. I told him I loved him. I told him I would be home the next afternoon. Then I called my brother Tom. Tom did not believe me. I sent him 3 of the photos Rachel had sent me. I played him a 30-second clip of the recording. Tom, who is now 34 years old and a county prosecutor in Indiana, did not say anything for almost 2 minutes. Then he said, "Claire, send me the entire recording. Send it to me right now." I sent it. Tom called me back 3 hours later. He told me he had spoken to a colleague at the FBI Indianapolis field office. He told me that what my father had done was a federal crime. The statute of limitations on most of the charges had not yet expired because the underlying fraud was ongoing. Every single day, my father was using a falsified identity to live. He told me that Aunt Diane and Uncle Pete were also exposed. So was the lawyer who had filed the death certificate, so was the funeral home director. There were 5 separate criminal cases that could be opened, depending on how aggressive the U.S. attorney wanted to be. Tom asked me what I wanted to do. He told me I had 3 options. 1, I could go to the FBI. They would arrest my father within 48 hours. He would face 15 to 25 years in federal prison. Aunt Diane and Uncle Pete would face accessory charges. The lawyer would lose his license. The funeral home director would face fraud charges. It would be a public case in Indiana. It would be on the news. 2, I could go to my father's second wife, Margaret. I could tell her the truth, and I could destroy his second life without involving the law. 3, I could do both. I told Tom I wanted to think about it overnight. I lay in my hotel bed for 6 hours. I did not sleep. I thought about Aunt Diane, who had baked me a cake every birthday from age 3 to 16. I thought about Uncle Pete, who cried at my wedding when he gave a toast in my father's place. I thought about the funeral home director, whom I did not know personally, but who had made a single bad decision under pressure from a friend. I did not feel any pity for my father, but I did feel pity for the others. I called Tom in the morning. I told him I had decided on a 4th option, which he had not given me, but which I had thought of in the middle of the night. Option 4, I would go to Margaret first. Alone, I would tell her the truth, and I would tell her I would not pursue federal charges against my father on 3 conditions. 1, he would tell Margaret everything himself, in front of me, the next afternoon. 2, he would sign a document drafted by Tom's law firm agreeing to a permanent restraining order keeping him from contacting me, my brother, my children, my husband, my mother, or anyone in our family for the rest of his life. 3, he would file a corrected identity with the Social Security Administration, the IRS, and the state of Arizona, returning to his real name and acknowledging publicly that he had committed fraud, paying any back taxes the government determined he owed. If he did all 3, I would not press federal charges. The other accomplices, Diane, Pete, the lawyer, the funeral home director, would be left alone. If he refused any of the 3, I would walk into the FBI office in Indianapolis on Monday morning and hand over everything. Tom told me he would draft the documents. I called my father at 12:30 p.m. I told him I was coming to his house at 3. I told him to make sure Margaret was home. My father agreed to all 3 conditions. Margaret left him within a week. He returned to using his legal name within 2 months. He paid $68,000 in back taxes and penalties. He filed a corrected identity with 3 federal agencies. He moved out of Margaret's house and into a small apartment in a different part of Phoenix. Aunt Diane has not spoken to me since I told her on the phone that I had found him. Uncle Pete called me, drunk, 6 weeks later, and apologized for 45 minutes. I let him. I told him I forgave him for the original choice he had made under pressure, but that I would not be in his life anymore. He cried. I hung up. He has not called again. My mother, when I told her, sat down on the floor of her kitchen and laughed for almost 10 minutes. Not a happy laugh, the laugh of a woman who has carried something for 20 years and finally been allowed to put it down. She told me when she had stopped laughing that she had suspected since the funeral. She told me she had not said anything because she had not been sure, and because, in her words, your father had spent 20 years training me to doubt myself. My brother Tom, who is a county prosecutor, told me, off the record, that the deal I had made with my father was, in his professional opinion, more cruel than any prison sentence. He gets to be alive, Tom said, with no money, with no family, with his fraud on public record, watching the rest of his life pass on a calendar he can't escape from. That's 25 years of nothing, Claire. That's the worst sentence you could have given him. I have not seen my father since the afternoon at his house, when he confessed to Margaret in front of me. I do not plan to. My children, Lily and Noah, are now 11 and 8. They know in age-appropriate language that their grandfather did not really die in 2012. They know he made some bad choices. They know he is alive, but that we do not see him. They have not asked any more than that. I think they will, someday. And when they do, I will tell them the truth, including the part where their mother spent 5 years quietly making a list, and 3 weeks running an investigation, and one morning sitting across from a ghost in a coffee shop in Phoenix, and the part where she got the recording, and the part where she chose, in the end, not to destroy him with the law, but to let him live with the consequences of the choice he had made 12 years earlier. Some people, when you catch them, you do not need to punish them. You just need them to carry their own life out in the open. That is enough. If you have ever been the child your parent walked away from, if you have ever been told it was complicated, if you have ever been the one who built a life around a wound that someone else inflicted on purpose and then was told to stop talking about it, leave one word in the comments below. The word is found. Whether you have found them, or whether you are still looking, or whether you have decided that some people do not deserve to be found at all, the word is for you. We see you. We've been you. You're not alone. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story. We share a new one every week about quiet women who knew exactly what they were doing the entire time everyone underestimated them. Until then, keep your list. The truth always shows up. Sometimes it just takes 12 years and a Facebook photo.